Chapter 3. They were waiting for Ahriman. Jezreel had decided to meet the emissary in a high-vaulted chamber in the Titan Child's jutting bridge tower. Perhaps it had once been a forum or gathering hall, but the harrowing had made it a throne room. Candles of human tallow burned at the foot of the walls, dribbling melted pools of fat across the black stone floor. The light they cast was spluttering, smoke-edged, and stank of cooking meat. The dead hung from the ceiling on hooks and rusted chains. Dried corpses, their skin shrunk over screaming skulls. Fresh heads still thick with clotted blood and flies. Pale torsos, their limbs and heads severed by neat cuts. The symbol of a fang-lipped chalice covered the floor, hacked into the stone with heavy blows. At the far end of the chamber sat the throne. Raised on tiers of black iron, it had been the command seat of an imperial warship, but its systems had been stripped, and its metal frame draped with tanned hides of a dozen species. Skulls of those same species lined the plinth it sat on, their yellow domes spattered with script and arcane patterns. Ahriman entered from a side door, and Jezreel flicked a bladed finger to indicate a place at the foot of the throne. The lord was nervous, and tension hung in the air like the static before the arrival of a storm. "Come and stand with us, Horkos," Jezreel growled, and fumes coughed from his armor. The rest were already there. Ziatzis and Kadadaran stood one step below Jezreel, flanking the approach to their lord. Two champions also stood next to the throne, their chain blades resting point down at their feet. Marath stood beside Jezreel, one step down so that he could lean across the massive arm of the throne to whisper in his lord's ear. Ahriman was the last, and the least of Jezreel's circle, and so stood the furthest from the lord. Jezreel nodded, satisfaction and impatience gliding over his features. All his vassals were in place, a blunt show of power and majesty to the unknown emissary. "Be aware of any trickery," growled Jezreel. "This emissary is a sorcerer." "Did they come for us, or is it a chance meeting?" croaked Kadadaran. "We must learn the answers from this audience," said Jezreel, and raised a clawed hand to the two harrowing that flanked the bronze doors. Ahriman was suddenly aware of a presence beyond those doors, a presence that burned in the warp like a bound star. It had a shape and structure, an outline formed by disciplines that were as familiar to him as his own hands. The guards were moving to the doors, their movements dream slow to Ahriman's eyes. He blinked. A raven rising from a plain of dust, red drops falling from its feathers, its wings swallowing the sunlight. The doors were opening. He looked down at his hands, the vision still swimming through his mind. A sickly warmth was spreading through his body, prickling his skin, filling his mouth with the taste of nausea. "No," he thought, and the word was a desperate scream in his head. "I am not that man. I failed." He wanted to run, but he could not move. He looked up as the high doors swung wide. The raven turned on the wind, looking at him with sapphire eyes. A figure stepped through the door. He wore robes the white of dried bone, his armor deep red and silver-edged. Green eyes shone from a mask of bronze beneath a striped crest of crimson and white. A sword hung at his waist. Two figures followed the first. Their armor, too, was red and silver. Lapis and ivory spiraled over the casings of the bolt guns held across their chests. They moved with machine-like precision, stopping a pace behind the emissary and becoming utterly still. Ahriman heard a low whispering, like words spoken just out of hearing. Ahriman felt ice run across his skin. He knew the armor, the craft that had gone into its making, and the symbolism that had guided the maker's hand. The emissary was a sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, and his two followers were not living warriors, but Rubrikai. Not alive, but denied death, they were ghost-driven shells. Seeing the blank stare of their helmet eyes, Ahriman felt his world blink to blackness. The chamber vanished, and for a heartbeat he saw again the raven flying in a burning sky. The raven's cries laughed in his ears. "I am fate, Ahriman. I am the turning of stars, and the death of time." Ahriman stilled his breath, fighting to keep his mind clear. His gaze locked on the trio. Inside his mind he could feel the presence of the emissary gliding over the chamber, tasting each mind for intent and type. He forced his mind to ascend through levels of control and focus, cooling his surface thoughts to a meaningless static. He felt the emissary's mind touch his, and almost cried out. He was seeing the face of a friend thought long dead. Tolbek! The name sprang into his mind, and now as he looked again he recognized the subtle details of posture and stance. An adept of the pirate and the long broken traditions of Prospero, Tolbek had been one of the first to join Ahriman's cabal. Tolbek had played his part in the rubric that destroyed their legion and shared in their banishment. Ahriman had not seen him since. He is alive! The thought rose in his mind with a rush of emotion. I am not alone. Inside his helm, his mouth opened and words began to form on his tongue. But why is he here? How is he here? The questions were suddenly sharp splinters in his thoughts, and his words died in his throat. He blinked, and the image came again. An unkindness of ravens spiraling around him, their cries rising louder and louder. Ahriman tried to remain still as his mind screamed. He was breathing hard. The vision had slipped into his mind like a razor. He had not experienced anything like it since his exile, and it was not over. He could feel pressure building inside his head. He heard snatches of voices, and vague images smudged his sight. I come with greetings. Tolbek's voice was deep and resonant, filled with authority, but Ahriman heard the edge of contempt in the tone. Jezreel must have heard it too, or noted the absence of title and obeisance. The Lord of the Harrowing stirred, the blades of his claws clicking on the throne's arms. From whom do you come? Asked Jezreel. I speak for the Brotherhood of Dust, said Tolbek, and Ahriman glanced up to see Maroth whispering frantically in Jezreel's ear. A name I do not know, said Jezreel. Ahriman's mind was racing, drawing together possibilities, memories, and fears. He thought of the glowing eyes of Karaz, of the snatches of vision glimpsed in the taking of the Titan child. He had spent lifetimes of mortal men, hiding from what he had been, not knowing what became of his brothers. Now the past had found him, and he could feel its threat as if it were a sword above his head. Why not let it fall? Why not let fate end here, he thought. Because you do not believe in that fate, Ahriman, said a voice in his mind, and he could not tell if it was his own. If you can help us find what we seek, then the rewards will be great, said Tolbek. What could you reward me with? Jezreel gestured to his throne and attendants. Things you could not grasp in your dreams, said Tolbek softly, and Ahriman could see the hunger in Jezreel at the words. What is it that you seek? Asked Jezreel, and Ahriman felt the answer appear in his mind with complete certainty. It was not a trick of prophecy or a truth seized from the warp, but he knew, and the truth was a cold hand round his hearts. We seek a sorcerer, said Tolbek. Without considering why, Ahriman brought his mind to a point of complete focus. He felt calm, the old battle calm that he had not felt for a lifetime of exile. He felt the warp align with his thoughts. Long ago, in a time that seemed so far removed from the present as to seem a dream, he had learned the spiral of the Corvidae. It was a discipline of future prediction, physical precision, and mental control as much as it was of the blade. It was an art of killing. Beside him, Jezreel chuckled and gestured again at his attendants. Of those I have enough, but they serve me alone. Ahriman drew the warp to him, subtly aligning thought in patterns he had believed forgotten. He felt doors he had sealed off in his mind open. It felt like the first breath after coming to the surface of a deep sea. No, he thought. No, I will not. But he did not stop. Senses he had kept closed opened. Denied powers and possibilities sprang into his mind. He felt the warp overlay his perceptions. Stop now, before it is too late, he heard the warning in his own voice. We seek the sorcerer called Ahriman, said Tolbek. Ahriman felt his mind register his name. His senses were alive, seeing the small movements of Tolbek's fingers on the pommel of his sword, hearing the dull roar of the warp around him, like the pounding of ocean waves. For what? Asked Jezreel, a dangerous smile splitting his face. Ahriman's eyes settled on Tolbek, seeing his physical form overlaid with his etheric aura. Power, a lot of power, held back like water behind a dam. Tolbek remained silent for a heartbeat. Ahriman saw his aura flicker. For the settling of fates and tallies of betrayal, said Tolbek. Jezreel nodded slowly, Maroth whispering in his ear. Ahriman could feel the minds of the others in the room. Jezreel bloated with hunger, Maroth a tangled mess of fear and pride, The other two harrowing sorcerers murky lumps of exaggerated emotion and vestigial power. He noted each. "What can you tell us of him?" It was Maroth that spoke, his rasping voice ringing hollow in the gloom-filled air. Tolbeck fixed the soothsayer with an emerald stare. "I see that you have nothing I seek." Tolbeck turned and took a step towards the door. "I have many sorcerers in my service," called Jezreel, and Ahriman could hear the desire and the angered pride in the Lord's voice. "Perhaps you would hear the rewards that your service would earn from me." "Do not be foolish," said Tolbeck, half turning to look at Jezreel. "I have searched across the stars and void. I have spoken with those who would grind you to nothing but a thought. You do not have what I need, and so I go." A lie, thought Ahriman. He could feel Tolbeck's mind unfolding into the ship, tasting minds, searching. He fought to make his mind a mirror, his thoughts blank. The flicker of black feathers, and a red sun rolling through a starless sky. Jezreel was rising from his throne. Chain blades spun to life in the hands of the guards by the door. Ahriman felt a sudden surge in the warp, a ragged wind coiling around Maroth as the soothsayer muttered guttural phrases. A second later, Ziatzis and Kadadaran were also the center of growing spirals of invisible power. Tolbeck was still and silent, but to Ahriman's eyes he was a towering shape of diamond and spreading flame. The floor began to glow around Tolbeck. The candles melted to pools of pale liquid. Ahriman could feel his heart beat inside his chest. The vision pressed against his mind. An impression of a red sun and black wings flicked across his sight. He fought the image down. His head felt like it was about to explode. "Do not let your pride guide you down a path you could not return from," said Tolbeck, and his voice was the soft roar of an inferno. "Have your sorcerers look down those future tracks, if they can. They will tell you that this meeting has ended in your favor." Maroth's enchantment vanished from his lips. He was shaking, and sweat beaded on his face. He was afraid. Ahriman could tell that without looking at him. Jezreel remained standing, his fingers flexing, but he said nothing. The firestorm around Tolbeck faded from the warp. The floor cracked as the stone began to cool. Ahriman kept his gaze steady on Tolbeck. He held his mind in the poised focus of battle readiness. An image of Tolbeck standing on the plains of the Red Planet flashed in front of his mind. He remembered Tolbeck turning to him as the dust settled under the rising sun. In that remembered moment, there had been fear in Tolbeck's eyes. Tolbeck paused, and then turned to look at Ahriman. The beaked front of Ahriman's black helm hid his face, but he felt Tolbeck's gaze as if it were the barrel of a gun. "You," said Tolbeck. "He knows," thought Ahriman, and felt a stab of hatred and suspicion bloom from Tolbeck, and then vanish as it was suppressed. "What is your name, Crowhelm?" The question hung in the air. Jezreel was turning to look at Ahriman, words forming on his lips. Maroth was watching Tolbeck, his hand moving towards his weapons. Above them, the chains stirred and clinked. Ahriman could feel the warp become suddenly still and calm. "Brother," said Ahriman. "It is truly you," replied Tolbeck, and Ahriman felt the surprise in the sending. "Why have you come?" Ahriman felt Tolbeck's mind harden, his thoughts hiding behind walls of protection. "You must come with me." "To what end?" Tolbeck did not reply. Ahriman could see a glimmer of the truth of the fortress of Tolbeck's mind. There was anger, and sorrow, and bitterness. The emotions blazed like multicolored lights and tasted like ashes. "I will not go with you," he sent. "I am not what I was, and I will never allow myself to be again." "That choice is not yours." "I am sorry, brother," said Ahriman. The flame leapt from Tolbeck's hand. Ahriman froze as shock washed through him in a cold wave. For a fraction of a heartbeat, he could not believe the suddenness of Tolbeck's attack. "He is my brother," he thought, and felt the warp coiling around him, held taut, waiting for his will to give it form. It was like regaining feeling in a forgotten limb. There will be no way back after this, he thought, and felt paths of cause and effect skitter at the edge of his awareness. The old divinations of the Corvidae, so long sealed off, returning like insects drawn to light. Ahriman was still as the fire reached for him. He raised a hand. Tolbeck was moving, his blade in his hand, its edge blinding bright. The flame hit Ahriman's palm and exploded outwards. Ahriman's mind was a still point at the center of a storm. Beside him, Ziatzis raised his hand, energy flowing to the gesture. Ahriman felt the threat and shifted the shape of his thoughts. Xiaxis came off the floor and split apart into armor fragments and tatters of flesh. One of the harrowing initiates beside Jezreel had taken a step towards Ahriman, the teeth of his chain sword starting to spin. With a thought, Ahriman flung the bloody cloud of bone splinters at the champion. A shard found an eyepiece, and the champion went down, his chain sword shrieking to life in his dead man's grip. Tolbek had taken 2 paces towards Ahriman, fire still spraying from his hand. Ahriman's mind reached across the warp, grasped the flame, and pulled with his will. It felt like sinking his teeth into soft meat. Tolbek cried out in surprise and pain. The fire curled around Ahriman, spinning in a cyclone, turning faster and faster, roaring as it fed on the chamber's air. Ahriman wanted to laugh. He had refused this power for so long, had feared the doors it opened and the future it would draw him to. But now fate had found him, and fear vanished. The sensation of battle and power surged through him in euphoric waves. He felt the ether respond to his mind, forming to his emotions and intellect. He could see the next few moments playing out in exact detail. The gasp of air from Marot's lips, Tolbek's sword rising, the blood of the door guards bright on the floor. And through it all, he could see his actions sliding through these moments, like a razor slicing flesh. How could he have ever put this aside? The years of fear and doubt shrank in his mind as he soared above them on a god's wings. The pressure in his head exploded, and for a blink, the chamber vanished. And the raven laughed, and the ground spiraled beneath him as he rose into the red sun. Reality blinked back into place. Tolbek was charging, sword rising in a glowing crescent. At the chamber door, the 2 harrowing guards had started forwards. Marot gasped, shaking where he stood, and Ahriman could taste the fear fuming from him in black clouds. Ahriman reshaped his thoughts, and the firestorm enveloped Tolbek. Tolbek was burning, his robes charring, his armor glowing with heat. Tolbek spoke a word, and the flames sucked into his body like water draining into sand. Jezreel was fast, despite his bulk. His claws reached for Ahriman, lightning coating their tips. Ahriman turned to look at Jezreel, and the claws sparked across a wall of invisible force. The harrowing initiate on Jezreel's right began to move, his thoughts a feral babble of instinct and rage. A part of Ahriman's mind locked around the champion's thoughts and squeezed. The champion began to spasm. "Higher! Higher!" called the raven, and he could feel the heat of the red sun in his body as the ground vanished beneath him. One of the harrowing by the door fired. The bolt round skimmed Tolbek's shoulder and exploded. He did not stop moving. Ahriman heard the telepathic command flick from Tolbek's mind, and saw the light in the eyes of the 2 Rubrikai flicker. They turned towards the door and fired. The bolt shells glowed as they burrowed through the air and hit the harrowing guard. Suddenly there was blood splattering the floor. The guard screamed, blue flames spreading across his body from his shattered chest. The Rubrikai fired again, and fire swallowed the second guard's head. Ahriman could feel the hunger in the flames as they burned the guards to gray ash. Jezreel's claws raked across Ahriman's kind shield, each blow shaking the sorcerer's focus. He turned and looked at Jezreel, seeing the pulsing blood flowing beneath armor and flesh. Warped twisted molecules spun in the dark liquid. Ahriman broke their bonds with the thought. Jezreel began to shake, then to howl. He scrabbled through the air, claws trailing blue sparks, his face bloated, black blood boiling from his mouth. The vents in his armor coughed and vomited foul liquid. The flesh sloughed from his body, but his skull continued to scream as he fell. Kadadaran finally reacted. The twisted sorcerer sent a forked tongue of black lightning from his hand which cut through Ahriman's kind shield with a detonation of sunlight. Pain bored into him, running up his nerves and across his skin. For an instant his focus almost slipped. He had misjudged Kadadaran. He would not make that mistake twice. Just behind Kadadaran, the remaining harrowing initiate was convulsing on the floor. Ahriman still held the warrior's mind in his own, and he willed the other to rise. The effort made him shake, and he felt a cry rising to his own lips. The champion came to his feet, swayed, and cut Kadadaran's head from his shoulders. Ahriman ripped his mind out of the champion's, and then the lifeless body was falling. Tolbek took another pace closer, and all Ahriman could see was red, the red of death, the red of a bloated sun. The sun filled the sky. The ground was a memory forgotten beneath his feet. The raven was a silhouette of shadows against the sun. "Look," said the raven. Tolbek was 3 strides from Ahriman, footsteps scattering blood drops from the floor. The sword in his hand was blue with heat. Arcs of lightning crackled across his scorched armor. Ahriman was dimly aware of Maroth, still alive, cowering behind the throne. He reached out with his own mind, felt the soothsayer's psyche like a cracked spear in his mind's grip. He squeezed, and somewhere he heard Maroth shriek. Pain filled Ahriman, sudden and bright. It felt as if a door long shut in his soul were straining at its locks. Images of raven feathers and dying suns pressed into his mind, trying to pull him back. He shut them out, raised his hands with palms open, waiting for Tolbek. The surface of the red sun cracked and flowed, and he realized that the molten fire was a sea of faces, and that each one was screaming. The sword shimmered as it cut down towards Ahriman's head. The telekinetic blow was unrefined and desperate, but it worked. Tolbek's sword twitched to the side, and Ahriman felt Tolbek's focus break. Ahriman moved forwards, his open hands clamping over Tolbek's grip on the sword as he pivoted. Tolbek flew through the air, and Ahriman caught the movement with his mind and slammed his brother into the floor. He stamped down on Tolbek's chest and felt something crack. Tolbek's sword was in his hand, its sigil-etched blade still crawling with fire. On the floor, Tolbek tried to come to his feet. Ahriman hammered his mind into Tolbek's, breaking wards and mental shields with raw power. "Who sent you, brother? How did you find me?" Tolbek's mind slid out of his grasp. Ahriman could feel something forming in Tolbek's mind, even as he bored deeper trying to find truth. He punched through walls of thoughts and cut through dream structures. He was angry, and the anger gave his power a vicious strength. Tolbek retreated, vanishing into the darkness of his unconscious, taking the truth with him. In the stopped clock reality of the throne room, the chase was a space between heartbeats. "To dust return, brother," called Tolbek's voice, and suddenly Ahriman was drowning in a sea of ashes. Tolbek's mind was immolating, pulling itself apart as it retreated from Ahriman's telepathic invasion. Tolbek's laugh was the howl of the inferno. Ahriman barely had time to pull his mind back. Tolbek's armor cracked, glowing lines running over its surface. Then it flared with eye-searing light and crumpled to molten slag and black powder. Ahriman shook, a bitter taste of bile and blood filling his mouth. He could feel the power he had wielded washing through him, draining through his mind, and the image of the raven and the red sun beat on him. He could not close it out. The barriers in his mind and soul shattered. His mind, so long blunted to the call of the future, flooded with sights of the impossible. The vision took him, and he rose on raven wings into a sky the color of blood. "Look, look, you must see," called the raven, and it was flying into the red sun, and Ahriman was following, his wings burning to smoke. He saw a warrior robed in blue and armored in gold and sapphire standing beneath a white sky. The warrior reached up and pulled his helm across from his head. Ahriman felt the idea of a breath catch in his throat. The eyes that looked back at Ahriman were blue, and they were his own. The image smiled with his mouth. "You see," said the warrior, but it was the raven's voice that spoke. "I know you, demon," growled Ahriman. "Demon," laughed the warrior, but Ahriman heard the sound in his mind. "Once you would have said that such a word was a sign of ignorance." "I remember," he snarled. "Your lies will fail, as they did before." "Are you so sure?" said the warrior. Its chuckle the call of carrion. "You call me demon, yet what do you know of such things?" The image in front of Ahriman changed, the features melting, the crystal blue armor splintering and reforming as the flesh beneath burst into a new form. Wings spread from the creature's shoulders, the feathers fluttering between colors. The body grew taller, its back bending into a hunch, the limbs splitting. Delicate claws extended from fingers, and the fragments of the sapphire armor flowed across the towering form. The head that looked back at Ahriman was a mass of eyes without a mouth. "You see," said the creature. "You remember this path even though you shunned it." "No, never," said Ahriman, his voice a shaking whisper. "It is a lie." The creature laughed in his head, and he felt rage. He had seen the truth of the warp and the demons that called themselves gods. They were lies, lies and temptation, and the ruin of everything. They were corrupters of truth. His legion had fallen. His father had fallen. He would sink. He would become less than a slave, but he would not fall to the lies he had before. His fist lashed out before he realized what he was doing. It struck the creature, and cracks radiated from the impact. Mirrored splinters cascaded down in a rain of fragmented images. Ahriman raised his head to shout, but he had no mouth, only eyes. The raven's laugh filled his mind, and he was spinning through space, his body broken into countless pieces of mirror. He was standing above a plane of black glass. Beneath him, 1,000 figures knelt. Some still had features of humanity, a head above shoulders, a face with eyes and mouth, but most were shaped by nightmare. Drooling mouths opened and closed across bodies that were at once glass and flesh. Arms sprouted, clutched and withered. Hooting calls filled the air. Ahriman had to look, his eyes moving from figure to figure, searching for what he knew must be there. When he found it, he stared. The mark of the 1,000 suns was clear on the shoulders of every figure. "Your brothers," said the crow voice from behind Ahriman. "Or are they your sons?" Ahriman said nothing. His eyes were still fixed on the serpentine sun symbol etched onto the shoulder of one of the figures. "This is a lie," whispered Ahriman. "Is it?" said the voice behind him. "Time is not fixed, nor is flesh, nor is fate." The voice paused, and Ahriman looked down. His hands were claws. A shiver passed through him, and he felt the feathers of his wings rustle at his back. "You could rule over all this," said the voice. "You could cast down your father and undo what you have done. The rubric can be undone." "No," said Ahriman. "You cannot listen," he thought to himself. He had opened the door to powers he had long shunned, and the warp in its lies had found him. "This is a lie. I must not listen." "Yes, all can be changed, even the fate you created for your brothers, but in the undoing—" The voice trailed away as Ahriman looked over the things that had been his brothers, his legion. "No, better dust." "But this will be. Can you not see?" asked the voice, and the world turned. He was standing amongst the creatures that had been his brothers. The wet stink of their flesh filled his gorge with bile. He felt his limbs distorting, bones softening to clay, flesh to slime. He tried to speak again, to call the vision a lie, to deny the demon's claim, but he had no mouth. He was less than a beast, less than dust. "Others will act, Ahriman," said the crow voice in his head. Above him and his brothers, a figure in bone robes and red armor stood on a pillar of jade. Horns rose from the red figure's temples and jutted from the jaws of its helm. "Others will tread the paths you do not. It is fated." The voice paused, and the scene began to whirl into color and fading sensation. But who walks those paths? Who is the master of fate, and who its victim? That is unknown. He was shivering. Somewhere he was shivering, and blood was running from his mouth and nose. "Fate has come for you, Ahriman, as you feared it would, and knew it must." The crow's voice became fainter, and he could feel the hard inner surface of his armor. He was lying on the floor of the throne room. He could taste acid and blood on his tongue, and a blinding pain throbbed behind his eyes. "Remember," chuckled the raven's voice, as blood spread across the throne room floor, and ash fell as silent snow.